Welcome to the next module. Now we will take a look how we can add foam to our ocean. To do this, first we will take a look at the new foam SOP. Then we will take a look at performance optimization of simulations in general, because all this flip stuff will get really resource intensive, so we will look how we can optimize it. And for sure we will again look at reference footage, and the last step will be tweaking the materials of our foam and the rendering. Here we are back in Houdini where we left off in the last module. So let's jump into our ocean surface and let's drop down in foam SOP. Ocean foam, here it is. And this node here expect as an input the spectrums. So let's connect them and display the new node. As you might see now, there's just a little patch here in the middle. That's not what we are looking for. The idea here is that we want to use the camera distance to calculate the foam. So based on the camera position, for example, we want to have 2 kilometers away foam, and behind this range we will use the white caps that the shader generates. So let's switch here on the foam SOP from region, from grid to camera, and pick our camera 1 in this case, accept. Okay, now you have the controls here for the near and the far range. So you can tweak it specifically to your shot. In this case, let's say we want to have foam about 1500 meters away. So, and it directly generates it based on the camera position 1.5 kilometers foam. Another nice feature here is the Z density falloff. If this has a value of 1 or higher, then in the distance there will be generated less points, but these points will have a higher p-scale. So in the end, in the rendering, it will look fine, but you will have to simulate less points. So really useful feature. So before we start tweaking the actually foam look with all these values we have here, let's first talk a bit about performance optimization in simulations, because the flip simulations are really resource intensive, especially the ones we will doing in the later modules. And there are some nice and effective ways to see where your simulations are lacking performance and how to monitor them properly. First thing here is a performance monitor. This is really handy, so I would always recommend, if you're running a new simulation, use the performance monitor, because it tells you which nodes are slow in your network. So let's just crank up the particle density here a bit, 30 for example, and on the performance monitor tab, you should have it here. If not, just bring it up, new pane type, performance monitor, and now hit record, and let's jump to frame 5. Now it starts calculating our foam until frame 5. Viewport performance is not a matter because it's just going to 5 without displaying it. And now you will have a feedback here in the performance monitor. You will see exactly which node calculated how many seconds. So in this case we see that our ocean foam is quite intensive, but inside there is the scatter from ocean node which calculates the most time. So just to generate our emission points takes quite a long time. Another nice thing is here, if you hit stop, then it will save your profile. So at this profile 10 now here at the moment. Now let's try to optimize the performance a bit. Back to our ocean foam, down here, let's jump to frame 1 first. Is a downsample option. This means that all the spectrums that you have as an input will be downsampled by 1, for example. So the volumes inside there will have a lower resolution, and that should speed up our ocean foam. So let's just put a 1 here. Okay, you will see that it also changes the emission a bit because there's less information, but perhaps that's also fine for now. Back to performance monitor, just say record again and to frame 5. Now let's see if it calculates a bit faster. Okay, the calculation is finished. Now we see our new values here, and if you don't have the old ones in mind, no problem. If you hit stop here, you can still compare your two profiles, which is really useful. You can also use the compare two profiles option here. Just hit it, say which profiles you want to compare. Now you have detailed statistics here where you can see which profile was faster or slower. So minus 2.5 seconds. So it optimized the performance a bit. It doesn't seem much for you at the moment, but if you think of a simulation which takes, I don't know, 6 hours for 240 frames, then if you have saved from 10 seconds, 2 seconds, that's almost 20%, so that can be really important. That's the first thing. Another nice feature here is to activate the memory stats. If you have activated this and record a new profile, just jump back and to frame 5 again, or reset the simulation first, control click here on this little brain icon, and now to frame 5 again. You can already see that here you have now a memory growth option. That gives you a first hint how much memory your simulation will consume. But there are also ways to optimize it. So, back to our ocean foam, let's keep in mind that later when we will simulate our tweaked foam on the solver, we should disable the cache simulation. This is just linked with the DOP network inside, and it takes care that not all simulation frames will be kept in memory. So at the moment you can see here we have this blue bar, so that means we can step back and forth without recalculating the foam. That's nice if you want to evaluate something in the viewport, but if we crank up our resolution of the simulation, then it's always handy to deactivate this cache simulation toggle, because it makes sure that just the actual frame is in memory, and after this the data is written to disk and gets discarded. So we will save a lot of memory here. But we will come back to this when doing our high-res simulation. Okay, one more thing you should keep in mind when you're simulating the foam now is this displace particles option here. Let's just display also our ocean surface. You can do a control click here, then you will set the template flag with full preview, and you will see that our foam is now under our ocean surface here. That's because the displace particles option is deactivated. Later on, if we cache it out, it has to be deactivated because the displacement will be done in the shader. But for preview purposes, it's fine to activate it. Just keep in mind to disable it again when caching it out later. Before going to the next clip, I will just show a few more options to monitor your memory consume. I'm pretty sure you all know the task manager, pretty common tool, but you have also the resource monitor, which gives you more details about memory consumption and so on of a specific process, which is really useful. But let's say you're doing a heavy simulation overnight, about 6 hours, and in the morning perhaps it's failed or it's done, but you don't know how much memory was used. So it's difficult to say, yeah, I can do 20% more resolution, for example. But there also comes a handy tool, so let's just do Windows R and type performance monitor here, display it, and that opens up a tool which has a bit more options to keep track of your memory consumption. Let's jump to performance monitor here, and at the moment it's showing the processor time, which is also interesting, but let's add here a new information, do add, and now we will display just of one process the memory, the used memory. It's the private bytes is a good option here. Now you have to select your process here, which in this case is Houdini FX. If you're running it in a batch simulation, then you have to add hbatch here, that we will also do later on. So do add, okay, and change here the scale a bit, say okay. And another thing we have to do is to change here the scaling, properties, graph, and yeah, it depends how many RAM you have in your machine. Let's say it won't use more than 20,000 megabyte at the moment, so that's fine, okay. And now we have to change the scaling again. Oops, sorry, just to make sure to have a proper representation here. If you have the mouse here, you will see at the moment it's consuming about 3.6 gigabyte of RAM, the Houdini instance which is running. And you can also change the duration. At the moment it's just 1 minute 40 here. But if you do a properties and add general, you can sample it, for example, just every 10 seconds and increase the value here. So now you will have 2 hours 46, and it will sample the memory stats every 10 seconds. So you can even increase the duration more, and then if you let it run in the background in the next morning, you will still see how much memory your simulation was consuming. On Linux you could use the console command htop or atop to record your performance, and on Mac OS X there should be this instruments tool to record performance. But on Windows it's really handy to use a tool like this to make sure that your simulation is not running out of memory and can better judge how many particles, for example, you can simulate before you're out of RAM. So as you can imagine, the values, for example, for particle emission or volume resolution depends heavily on your system resources. So in the next lessons, if we are at such a point where we need to define how much resolution has our volume, for example, I will always provide different values for different system configurations. For example, 16 GB of RAM, 32 GB of RAM or more. So like this we can make sure that you can follow along and not running out of RAM all the time and crashing your computer. But just to keep in mind, for simulation in general, but especially for flip simulation, the resource consumption is really huge, especially memory. So put in as much RAM as possible in your machine. So in the next clip, before we start tweaking our values, we will take a look at reference again and see in which direction we need to go.